Hello, and welcome to Chucked and Blessed, where the weird gets wonderful and the woo-woo gets real. I'm your host, Charles Crooks, psychic, teacher, and guide on this deep dive into grounded spirituality. Let's keep it honest, curious, and connected. Here we go. Hello and welcome, my friends, to another episode of Chucked and Blessed. And I'm sorry that this is coming out a little bit later than I normally intend to, as I always try to have things out very early Sunday morning. But things have just been very crazy, and last night I had my second partnership event with the Good Time Girls, and they do the local history tours here in Bellingham. And they're the ones that actually who got me to start my tours, Bellingham Ghost Tours. So thank you very much to them for that, as I love doing it. And also, these podcasts probably wouldn't exist if I didn't have the tours, so again, thank you to them. But I want to bring it up because even though my focus here is not ghosts, we still had something really interesting happen. So if you've seen on any of my recent social media videos, either on Instagram or TikTok, I, especially on the ghost page, have displayed the device, the Ovulus, and supposedly this device can pick up very slight changes in the atmosphere and then translate those into words. So supposedly spirits can communicate with us by making these very, very slight changes. So I've always been very skeptical of this device until I had my very first event with the Good Time Girls, and we actually had the device spit out 3 names that were all related to this one story of kind of murder and mystery in the old town of Seaholm, which was an old part of Bellingham. And so I kind of thought, well, that was absolutely fantastic. It really kind of made me rethink the device's capabilities. And so I thought there's no way that it's going to happen a second time, but I really wanted to still do another event and try it out. So last night we actually had the second event of doing the same stories. We call it Spirits of Seaholm. And not only did we get 2 of the same names again that were mentioned to that exact same story, they were Ida and David. They were actually mentioned twice. Each name was mentioned twice throughout the evening, which again is just so rare. I've had the device spit out all sorts of names that whether they were connected or not, I never really had any sort of validation, but it was so cool to have those exact names related to the story in question come up again through a device that, as far as I'm aware, does not listen to us, cannot listen to us, has no Bluetooth or wireless connectivity, so it's not connected to my smart devices in any way, shape, or form. So yeah, I just thought it was a very, very cool experience to especially have it twice in a row. Definitely makes it seem like it's a little bit more than coincidence in what we're experiencing. But I also bring this up because tonight's focus is going to be about past lives. So not quite ghost related, but the idea that every single person has lived all sorts of different lives and has taken different experiences from those, and sometimes even taken away some of those energies into this life. So I really love reading past lives. It's one of my favorite things that I learned in my time at Simply Spirit as I developed my clairvoyance. And so this is one that I feel very excited about because I just think it's such an interesting thing with the possibilities that can come up. So here we go. As usual, we're going to start with some history. Have you ever had a moment where you felt like you'd been somewhere before, even though you hadn't? Or met someone for the first time and felt like you already knew them? These strange little flashes often get chalked up to deja vu, but for some people, they're clues pointing to something deeper, and that deeper might be a past life. So, As is tradition, to begin, we're going to dive a little bit into the history of reading past lives. So where does the idea even come from? Who started it? And when did people first try to remember who they used to be? So let's start first thousands of years ago in ancient India, where some of the first written ideas about reincarnation appear. According to Encyclopedia Britannica, the earliest known references to reincarnation are found in the Upanishads, dating back to around 800 to 500 BCE. These texts laid the foundation for beliefs that the soul doesn't die, but is reborn again and again, learning through each lifetime. Fast forward a few hundred years to a guy named Patanjali, a sage and scholar who compiled the Yoga Sutras around the 2nd century BCE. He talked about a practice called Pratiprasava. Please forgive all my pronunciations on this, but Pratiprasava, which literally means reverse birthing. In the Yoga Sutras, it says, "The yogi gains knowledge of previous births by practicing samyama, meditative concentration on memories." That's from the Book 3, Sutra 18. So yes, I do find it very interesting that reading past lives was literally a part of classical yoga and not just about the exercises. So this idea of remembering former lives also shows up in Buddhism and Jainism. In the Majjhima Nikaya, the Buddha says, "I recollected my manifold past lives, with their aspects and details." And in the Digha Nikaya, he talks about remembering hundreds of past lives while meditating under the Bodhi tree. In these traditions, past life memory wasn't a party trick, it was a sign of serious spiritual development. But India wasn't the only place where this was happening. In ancient Greece, the philosopher Pythagoras, yes, that is correct, the same Pythagoras of triangles, claimed he remembered his own past lives too. According to the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, it states, he professed to remember having been Euphorbus, a soldier in the Trojan War. That's backed up by the lives and opinions of eminent philosophers. That's the name of a book, which also said, Pythagoras was the first to introduce the doctrine that the soul is immortal, and that it transmigrates into different kinds of animals. So even in the West, ideas about soul reincarnation were floating around over 2,500 years ago. Now, let's skip ahead to the Middle Ages, where the idea of remembering past lives mostly disappears in Christianity and Islam, but it doesn't vanish completely. In Jewish Kabbalah, a mystical teaching called Gilgul Neshamot, literally soul cycling, describes souls reincarnating over generations. Scholar Jeffrey Dennis writes in the Encyclopedia of Jewish Myth, Magic, and Mysticism that this belief became formalized in 12th century, especially through the teachings of Isaac Luria. At the same time, Sufi mystics like Rumi spoke of the soul evolving through lifetimes. One of his most famous quotes says, "I died as a mineral and became a plant. I died as a plant and rose to animal." It's a poetic way of describing reincarnation across lifetimes and forms. Then in the early 20th century, we see a shift. The idea of past lives starts showing up in Western psychology, though not always in a spiritual way. In 1900, psychologist Theodore Flournoy studied a medium named Helene Smith who channeled what she claimed were past life memories. Flournoy didn't fully buy it. He came up with the term cryptomnesia, which means forgotten memories that resurface as if they were new. In his book, From India to the Planet Mars, he laid out how these subconscious memories might explain supposed past life recall. Now, if you've ever heard of Edgar Cayce, you know things start to get weird in the best way with him. Cayce was a Christian mystic, and in the 1930s and 40s, he would lie down, go into trance, and give readings and include details about people's past lives, many in Atlantis or ancient Egypt. According to the Association for Research and Enlightenment, he gave over 2,000 life readings describing previous incarnations, often tied to karmic lessons. Cayce wasn't trying to prove anything scientifically. He saw this as a tool for healing and soul growth. But the first really big mainstream past life case in the U.S. happened in the 1950s with the story of Bridie Murphy. A woman named Virginia was hypnotized by amateur therapist Maury Bernstein, and under hypnosis, she began to speak in an Irish accent, giving details of a life as a woman named Bridie Murphy from the 19th century Ireland. It became a media sensation, but later, researchers found that the details might have come from somewhere she knew in childhood, from someone she knew in childhood named Bridie Murphy Corkle. So, possible cryptomnesia again. That story was published in The Search for Bridie Murphy in 1956. Still, this launched a movement. In the decades that followed, hypnotists and psychologists began to use past life regression as a tool, and not just for curiosity, but for healing. And then we come to Dr. Ian Stevenson, a psychiatrist of the University of Virginia, who decided to study all this not through hypnosis, but by documenting real kids around the world who claimed to remember past lives. Between the 1960s and early 2000s, Stevenson compiled over 3,000 cases. He was meticulous. He only included cases where the child gave verifiable, specific details before meeting any relatives of the deceased person. In Reincarnation and Biology, published in 1997, he documented 225 cases where children's birthmarks or physical deformities matched injuries or conditions from their reported previous lives, often confirmed by autopsy or medical records. One famous case involves a boy in Thailand who had birthmarks resembling bullet wounds, entry and exit, on his head. He claimed to remember being a man shot in the head. Medical records confirm that the man had been killed that way. According to Scientific American, Stevenson presented hundreds of cases with verified biographical correspondences without hypnosis. So, what does this all mean? The history of reading past lives is older than most religions. It's been a spiritual practice, a poetic metaphor, a mystical revelation, and even a scientific question. Whether you see past lives as literal truth, subconscious metaphor, or something else entirely, the pattern is clear. Humans have always wondered if we've walked this earth before. And so I think there is something completely universal about wanting to know where we've come from. I think in some of my earlier memories of past lives, I remember the 900 commercials, and I know there's one still circulating on Instagram today about the pet psychic that could tell you about who your pet was in a past life. And of course, for entertainment purposes only, but I fully understand that people want to not only just feel special, but they want to feel connected to something bigger than ourselves. And especially if we can be told that maybe we were someone a little bit more famous or a little bit more special in a past life, there's something really exciting about that. And so I think very much like it talked about with Edgar Cayce and how he would see people in either ancient Egypt or Atlantis, I think that was always kind of like my vague idea of past lives, that they were from a very, very long time ago. But you have to think, too, that the human experience is very wide, and I think that there's a lot of just very ordinary past lives that we also have as well. And so when it comes to my personal experience within past lives, besides like seeing the commercials and things like that, I've always had a really, really strong sense of connection to Japan, and I cannot explain where it comes from. I think my earliest childhood memories that I have of anything was watching Big Bird in China from Sesame Street, and just it having this really profound impact, or at least Asian culture in general, having this profound impact on me. And it wasn't really until middle school, high school, where I got into anime, and that really focused my attention in on Japan. And I don't know what it is about the country, the culture, just everything about it, but there's something about when I am over there, I just feel that my soul is at peace in ways that I cannot describe. And I don't know if it's just being a part of everything and being kind of immersed in something different, but I very much recognize that I do have a connection for that country that I don't feel to other parts of the world. So definitely think there is something very much to that. But then my actual first experience getting a past life reading came many, many years later when I was living in the suburbs of Chicago. I believe I was in Arlington Heights, and there was this little psychic store that I would often frequent, and they would have psychic fairs once a month. And there was a woman who was doing Akashic Records readings. So I was like, perfect. I've heard of the Akashic Records through astral projection and that kind of stuff and those topics. And so super curious, I decided to get a reading with her. And so one of the very first things that she kind of pulled through was a past life. So this was really the very first anything that I had ever heard about any of my past lives from someone else. And I found it to be very interesting because it seemed like that there were a lot of qualities of this life that resonated with who I was at that time. And so she basically told me that she saw me as a young sailor exploring the ocean, and I was very much withdrawn from other people. I was more interested in nature than people. And there were just a lot of like little things that she mentioned. I can't remember all the specific details, but I remember feeling a very, very strong connection to that. So first experience with anything. And then years later, before I even did my clairvoyance work with Jill Miller here in town, I had gotten a reading from her maybe 2-3 times before. And so I had asked her about that past life, as that was one of the only ones that I had ever been aware of from someone else. And she also, without giving her the details, she also picked up on pretty much the same kind of vibes, but she more so got a sense of freedom with it. And that freedom was very, very important to me, and that it was kind of way of abandoning the known world and what that looked like, of getting a regular job and all that kind of stuff. So again, it very much resonated from someone that didn't know me at all. And so I looked further into this life when I actually started my clairvoyance lessons, but I'm going to save that for a little bit more later on. When I started to learn about past lives, I would definitely think that it was in the framework of time very much being linear. So like if you think about a straight timeline, thinking about that there's all these points in the past that I could have possibly existed on. So then when I did my clairvoyance work at Simply Spirit, I kind of got a different way to think about it. And so again, teacher Jill, she said that she kind of sees time not as a straight timeline or a linear timeline, but more as a circle. In that as spirit, we have the potential to jump into anywhere within that timeline, whether it's future or past. So let's say I could experience the life that I'm living right now, but then maybe in the next life, after I die, I might choose to then go back to the 16th century. So it was kind of a really big difference in how I kind of started to think about even time for myself. But it really kind of led into a lot more different possibilities existing within kind of the same space. And so most recently, I think the next kind of layer that I got in kind of a similar evolution to that is from the telepathy tapes. And again, if you have not listened to that podcast, I highly, highly recommend it, especially if you have any interest in any sort of psychic anything, because it's just absolutely remarkable. But one of the things that they talk about is one of the people who does have a very strong psychic connection that's featured in one of the episodes. They mention that past lives are really all existing in the present moment. So it doesn't necessarily matter kind of how they see it, because we have our existing life, and even if we do have all these other lives surrounding us, they all exist in this present moment and in this exact same time. So in a way, I kind of see it as a little bit more similar to that circular kind of time idea, but I think this one is everything is all existing at the same time all at once, so a little bit more layered, I guess, as far as how I think about it. So whether I know or not what is correct as far as any of those go, it's definitely something interesting to think about, and just what that means and how we could even experience past lives. So it is very interesting. But I think with anything that I pursue psychically, I always kind of want to know for myself, what is the purpose of doing so, and what is the importance of doing so? Because I feel like people can get very much lost in the kind of glamour of a past life, or especially if you are seeing yourself as or someone else sees you as an important figure from the past. And it's not about trying to make that life a deeper part of ourselves, but I think it's more about understanding a little bit more of where we come from, and if we need to disconnect from those energies and disconnect from those parts of ourselves, because I think we're very much in this life to be our own person. And so I think it's great to pay attention to these. I think it's great to be aware. And very much, I think, like I mentioned earlier in the history portion, that I think it's very important to use these as a way to find healing within self. But we also got to take it all with a grain of salt, because unless we can actually verify anything, especially if we're just psychically reading or kind of seeing these things in meditation, I think it's really more of a personal validating process than it is meant to be to hold on and kind of take that on as a new part of your ego. And so that's the last thing that we want. And I think it's very easy to take on things spiritually as a bigger part of your ego sometimes, because it feels special. And I fully understand that 100%, as I've done it myself in the past. So definitely not trying to judge anyone, but definitely want people to understand why, or at least have maybe a sense of awareness for yourself about why you are going into this. And so for me, it's really about kind of understanding the deeper parts of who you are, but then to also let go of and heal from those things that we don't necessarily need to carry over into our current life. I think one of my favorite things as a reader looking into past lives is just the absolute variation of things that have come to me that I feel like I could not make up. And maybe it is that cryptomnesia that was mentioned earlier again in the history, that these things are coming from somewhere deep inside me that I've maybe experienced in the past, and I'm just kind of bringing it out as it is newer. But there's a lot of things that have also resonated with people within the readings that I've done. And again, just the variation of what I've seen has been so great. To me, it honestly really feels like I can't make this stuff up, where even if I tried, it's been so different than I think what my brain would try to conjure up versus what I kind of naturally have come in and see. And so I think that's a really, really cool aspect of past lives. And again, even though we need to take it with a grain of salt, it can be a really validating experience, especially if there are things that do connect to aspects of self or that you feel close to. And so another thing that I've seen as well as a reader are that we do seem to repeat relationships with the people and the different souls in our life right now, but we repeat them in different ways to experience different lessons with them. So I've often heard that we have the same family that we kind of go with in many different lives. You might not necessarily have the exact same players every single life. I'm sure some step out, some will come in. To give an example of that, I've always had a very, very strong connection with my grandmother, my mom's mom. And can't explain it. It's just we've always been close. And so, of course, as I learned to read, this was a relationship that I was curious about. And I had this life come through where I was the father, so male, and married to my wife was my grandmother, so same soul, just different role. And I saw that my current mom was our daughter in that past life. And so I had those two people in that life, but it doesn't necessarily mean that I have every single member of my family within every single lifetime. And so I think, again, like I said, we have people that come and go, swap out, but I think there is a lot to importance of relationship and soul groups and kind of ways that we get to experience people in different relationships. I think one of the most important things that I've read about past lives was in the book, The Instruction, Living the Life Your Soul Intended by Ainsley MacLeod. And so basically he is psychic himself, or clairvoyant. I can't remember what he exactly calls himself. But he has a very good connection with his spirit guides, and he's kind of gotten all of this different information about what happens in between our lives and kind of our soul's purpose. And so he's kind of written the system from 1 to 10, where you have younger souls at the earlier numbers, so 1, starting at 1, and the more advanced souls you see at the level 10. And so just to give an example of what his system kind of looks like. Okay, so for level 1, the key traits of soul level 1 people are that they are in isolation, that they often have simplicity to their lives, and naivety. And so that might include, as far as kind of people, types of people, subsistence farmers, remote village artisans, or living in simple communities. For example, then we can jump up to level 3, which is all about conformity, conservatism, and church. So you might find people that are clergy, administrators in traditional institutions, bureaucrats. We could then jump up, let's say, to level 6, and 6s typically tend to focus on social justice, uncertainty, introspection, and so that might include people that are activists, counselors, community organizers, and therapists. And then so jumping up all the way to the end, level 10, you have altruism, inertia, compassion, so philanthropists, people like elders, sages, contemplative mystics, peace emissaries. And so whether this is all true or not, I found it very interesting because it really made me think about the soul and the soul's growth and kind of our purpose of such. I've kind of come to the conclusion for myself that as a spiritual being, it doesn't make sense to me that we would have a one and done life. Yes, you are going to learn from that life, but I think that there's more beyond that. And I think that we have so many chances to go through it again and again and again. But in doing so, you are going to have kind of souls at different ages. And so I always think about this, especially in terms of spiritual enlightenment. And when people talk about everyone kind of hitting this awakening point, and it really made me think that I don't think everyone is meant to be spiritually awakened, especially if there are souls at different levels. I think if you are soul level 1 or 2, and then all of a sudden you have this great spiritual enlightenment come your way, I kind of think that could almost be overwhelming and possibly damaging to that soul. And so I think that I kind of gravitate towards that idea of souls having kind of a very slow growth instead of like maybe we live a few lifetimes, then we're trying to hit enlightenment, or that we try to have that grand spiritual awakening. And I just don't think that that is the purpose of a lot of souls. Maybe eventually, and maybe eventually that's what they work towards. But I think that there's a lot of different people on different levels, and we see that within our own cultures and our own societies. And I think that's also kind of what adds to the diversity of life and the different personalities that we have and different ways of how people are with each other and who they are with themselves. So highly recommend at least checking it out. Again, that book was The Instruction, and that was by Ainsley MacLeod. Okay, so before I get into sharing a little technique of how you can experience a past life moment for yourself, I want to go back to that sailor life that came up twice for me, because when I looked at it one more time, it provided, I would say, what was a healing experience that I never could have expected. So it came time in my clairvoyance training to start working with past lives, start looking at them. And during the class, I remember our teacher, she gave us kind of this little exercise that she guided us through, where we kind of let a past life come up, or we could have chosen one if we knew about one. So the only one that I had ever known about was this mysterious sailor guy who liked the sea creatures more than people. And so I was like, let's see about him. I want to know more about this life and why it has meaning to me. So she kind of led us through this exercise where we saw different parts of this life. And the more I learned about it, I think, I know I was from Europe. I want to say I felt French. Or from early, like 1600s, maybe early 1700s France. And I was living with my mom, or at least my mom in that life, not my current mom. And she was very distracted by the lovers in her life. And I was pretty much adult kid at that point. I want to say 16, 17, and or at least adult kid for those times. And she was kind of done with me. And so I wanted to go find somewhere that was not there, as she was having her next life. And so that's what drew me to the ocean and working on the boats. And so as we again went through this life, saw different aspects, different things, and then Jill had us look to our death in that life and how we died. And I saw initially that I was on the boat, and it was a stormy night, and I got swept off the deck of the ship and I fell into the water. And so, of course, at this point, there was no hope of saving me in this raging storm. And the visual that I saw was one of the most beautiful things that I think I've ever experienced psychically. And it still obviously has great impact to me to this day. So as I was drowning, I kind of saw it through my eyes. And it was nighttime, and there were these incredibly large waves that were swelling all over the place. And you had the lightning that was lighting up the sky, but also lighting up the water. So I could see the ship just rocking back and forth in these massive waves. But the sense of peace that I felt was so incredible. And even though I knew I was dying and that there was no hope of being saved and that this was the end, the sense of just, I don't know, sereneness and just peace that came with it was so incredible, but also went with the visual of these big waves, and the water was so green. I remember especially being lit up by the lightning, that there was just something so wonderful about it. That, like, I don't know, I don't even have the words to fully describe just the impact or the weight that it had for myself. But ever since then, I don't have my fear of death like I used to have. And I even used to be really into horror movies. And so I thought about death a lot, and especially happening in really weird and strange and terrifying ways. But something about this, going through this experience, just kind of seeing it through my own mind's eye, absolutely gave me the peace that death is completely okay. And so if that is the lesson that I take away from this, I will take that 100 times over, especially if it allows me that kind of growth and that kind of healing within myself. So to me, that was where I really found that past lives had a very, very great importance to what it can influence in our experience here. And so I think that's why they're worth pursuing, and just really freaking cool as well, because whether any of that was true or not, it was still such an experience that I've held with me all these years later. So, all right. Let's talk about a way that you can now connect with the past life for yourself. So, very simple. You can do it with me here or just kind of learn the process and try it on your own later, but whatever feels comfortable. And before we jump in, just a quick little word of advice that as you go into this exercise, I don't want you to think about trying to identify a whole life all at once. When I kind of do it, I start with one little moment and I let things unfold from there. But I have to kind of give myself the space for something to kind of come in on its own without necessarily trying. So just be curious, be open, and you don't have to have all the answers right away, because I think sometimes people also feel intimidated that they should have this great sense or knowing about a whole lifetime or a whole life, and that's not the case. So start little, start small, and I wish you success. So here we go. All right, so go ahead and take a nice few deep breaths in through the nose and out through the mouth. Kind of wiggle it out in your seat. Personally, I like to do this sitting up. If I lie down meditating, I fall asleep way too easy. We're usually halfway through the meditation, so I prefer to do all my exercises sitting upright. But just kind of wiggle out anything that you need to from the day, or take a few more nice deep breaths if you've had a rough day, or maybe it's morning and you're just starting. But just go ahead and slowly start to come inside yourself and letting go all of the worries that you have, everything that you have to do. Trust me, it'll all still be there for you after you finish this. But for this moment, just allow yourself to find quiet, to find calm, and to find curiosity about what could come up. And so once you feel nice and relaxed, I want you then to put your attention in the center of your forehead. So when we psychically view, when we clairvoyantly view, this is a wonderful space to be in, because we have our third eye, or that sixth chakra, that energy center of being able to see clearly. And so I like to come up here to be able to see the past life. And once I feel I've got a nice kind of grounding up in my forehead, then, or things I at least feel settled there, then I'm going to set the intention that all I would like to see is a memory of a past life that is relevant to me right now. And then just allow whatever comes up in your mind's eye to come up. And you might even have to try a few times. You might have to kind of just wipe away what you see, or you might feel like you're creating something. And that's okay, especially if you're new to this. But just allow a sense of a past life to come up. And from here, we can ask deeper questions, like, why is this past life specifically coming up for me right now? What is the relevance of this coming up right now? but just allow yourself to get a sense of a different you from a different time. And take a few nice deep breaths again. And just know that you can come back to this experience, this life, at any time you want. And it will always be there for you. But with your last few deep breaths here, I just also want you to make an intention that you are disconnecting from the energy of that life and from that life's energy being in your space. We're here to learn about it and to see what relevance it has for us, not to take on that life itself. So we're just going to make a nice little separation and still taking a few nice deep breaths in through the nose, out through the mouth. And when you are ready, you can fully come back to the room. All right, and there we have it. So very easy, very simple, but all it really takes is you taking the time to get grounded, to get centered in yourself, and then just being open with setting a very clear intention, and then just allowing whatever comes up to come up. So I always find that it's helpful to journal what I see, so that way I also can come back to it, and you might have felt more of the emotion of something, or you might have seen it very clearly. So there's not just one way to experience this either. I typically tend to feel emotion very strongly through anything psychically that I experience. So for me, I will usually kind of tap into an emotion, and then I get a visual, and then I kind of let more unfold beyond that. But again, I'm not really trying to make this happen. It's more of an allowing of this to just kind of pop up in my space, and I see what I see. So try it out for yourselves. Anyway, I hope that at least this has given you a different way to maybe think about past lives, or even maybe you don't know anything about them at all, and this was an introduction. But alas, this is all I have for you today. I cannot thank you enough for being here and being open. You can visit charlescrooks.com or email me directly at info@charlescrooks.com to either book a reading or talk about anything that you've heard on the podcast further, as I love to discuss this stuff. But my friends, may you be forever chucked and blessed, and always go into this world with clear eyes and an open butt. So until next time, stay curious, my friends.